In this week's episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Denise Nichols, the Chief People Officer at Fortitude Re. Denise was born in Westchester County as the youngest of four children. She went to Hofstra University, where she majored in psychology. And after college, Denise began her career in the investment banking industry before taking the risk during the dot-com bubble in the startup technology space. Following this experience, she joined Marsh McLennan in a series of roles both inside HR and across the business. After her time with this organization, she joined Voya Financial, where she was the CHRO for the health and wealth business. She left Voya a few years later when she felt her career path would focus more on executive coaching. Denise started her own business and began working with leaders across a number of different industries. It was during this exciting and gratifying career phase that she got a call from a search firm about Fortitude Re. As Chief People Officer for the firm over the last 3 years, she has had the responsibility for all aspects of Fortitude Re's culture, brand, and people strategy, including talent management and development, employee experience, benefits and wellness, inclusion and belonging, and corporate responsibility. She is also the C-suite executive responsible for the company's marketing and corporate communications functions. Denise has been married to her husband, Bill, for 16 years and has one daughter. At this stage in her life, she spends most of her time outside of work on the sidelines of soccer games or tennis tournaments for her daughter. When she is not doing that, she loves New York Times crossword puzzles and being out on the water with her family and friends. One of the ways you can support this channel is to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This tremendously helps with the YouTube algorithms to get the Tales from the C-Suite podcast to broader audiences across all walks of life. I greatly appreciate your help in supporting the growth of our channel. If you find our interviews insightful and helpful with your career, please encourage your friends and colleagues to also listen to our episodes and subscribe, like, and comment on the videos. Thanks for your support and welcome to the show. I'm very excited to be joined today by Denise Nichols, the Chief People Officer for Fortitude Re, a global provider of customized reinsurance solutions. Good morning, Denise. How are you?
Good morning, Adam. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really excited to spend the time together today. I'd love to start just going back to childhood and some of the events that shaped early life. What were some memories that really stand out to you that have impacted you to today?
I have a very close family. So I'm the youngest of four kids and was raised in a pretty big extended family, particularly on my mother's side. All of our holidays were with cousins and aunts and uncles. And so for me, I learned the art of negotiation and compromise at a very early age.
What values and beliefs did your parents instill in you? What were some of the non-negotiables in your house growing up?
I didn't have very strict parents, particularly being the youngest of four. Once they get to you, they've sort of been there, done that. It was really helpful for me because I learned to make the right decisions for myself. And I also watched the mistakes of my siblings. So that was also pretty helpful. I let someone else experiment with it first and go, "Oh, okay, I don't want to do that." We are all pretty different. My mother went to nursing school when she was a young kid. So she didn't do a college degree. She did a nursing degree. And when I was about 3, she went back to work full time. She was a stay-at-home mom until then. So I really learned a work ethic from her because she went back to work full time and then she went to school full time, got her bachelor's degree, got her master's degree. And so in my context of growing up, I always had a professional working mom, either a student or a working mom. And so I really learned balance, how to balance work life from her, and also a commitment to goals from her. My father, I learned a lot of work ethic, a lot of studying ethic. He's an MD. So obviously he studied pretty hard and worked pretty hard through his life, but a lot of fun.
My mother, very similar background. She went back to school when she was in her early 40s. So my parents got divorced when I was young. She stood at home to raise us, and then she went back. And so very similar to you, I was used to her working into the night, studying, doing her work, and then coming in and working during the day. So it was a great experience just to see someone do that and put that in. What has that taught you about hard work, perseverance, and how you carry yourself today?
I think for me, it really taught me that you can pursue your goals and it's never too late. I had an experience when I left Marsh McLennan. I was very, very nervous about leaving. And I talked to my mother at that time and I said, I've always been responsible for my own financial future. And what if it doesn't work out? What if I make this choice and then I can never get a career back? And she said, oh, there's always time to get a new career. Look at me. Look what I did. It was a big relief to have her remind me of her experience. So I'll never forget that.
Was there anything early life for you that was an adversity you had to overcome, whether it was with friends, with school, academics, extracurricular activities?
So part of my personality is I let things go pretty quickly. I don't carry through life a big burden of crisis experience. That could be good or bad. But I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I used to come home and say, I don't get it because nuns are so mean. I don't get how are they supposed to be holy? And they're just really so mean. So I think for me, that was like a little bit of adversity, working through teachers who, instead of telling you, hey, great job, and giving you encouragement, would just say, you should always be doing this well. Sort of like a backhanded compliment. That was pretty tough to deal with.
So you definitely are an outlier with regards to being able to navigate adversity. Was that something that you learned from your parents? Was it something that just came naturally for you?
It probably does come from my parents. And if you believe that you inherit in your DNA some of the stuff that you get from your ancestors, I think the people from whom I descend had pretty tough times as immigrants to the country. Certainly, my mother's family, she had a brother that died when he was 18. That was very big hardship on her whole family. My father's father left his family when my father was a young child. So he had a lot of hardship and had to figure out how to make himself into something. So I think that somewhere is in my DNA.
I think there's always that fascinating piece between nature and nurture. Where does that mostly come from? When you think about your role today as being a leader, are most of those things learned? Are they natural?
I think it's both. It's such a fascinating question, isn't it? Because as a coach, I think about that a lot. How much can you coach and how much is just pre-wired? I think some of it is just how I'm wired. You asked me a question in a recent meeting that we had together about how did you learn to be a certain way? And I said, I just was born this way. That's just how I am. I think it was about my candor and ability to just be very direct. By the way, did not go well with the nuns. So it doesn't always work for you. And then I think my father, having had such a rough life and really struggling financially as a young kid, and really tried to provide like extra, like overcompensated for his kids. So you would think maybe that would make me a lazy person. If he could have helped it, I would have never worked ever. He was sort of overcompensating for his experience. So I just think it's maybe 50-50, pre-programmed, and then how you're raised and what you learn and the experiences along the way.
Yeah. Speaking of experiences, when you look at high school years, maybe K through 12, did you have any mentors, coaches, teachers that sewed into your life at that point or role models outside of your family?
No, I know that's pretty shocking. When I reflect back on my education, sort of K through 12, with the exception of Mrs. Bortz in first grade, I'll go back to her. But with that limited exception, I was like that middling middle that gets forgotten about, where I wasn't like an exceptional genius and I wasn't really struggling with any special learning needs. And so no one really paid attention. That just happens a lot. Mrs. Bortz was my first grade teacher, and I loved her. She gave me Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that book I got to bring home after the school year. But she took an interest in me and said, what reading group do you want to go in? Because you could be in the higher level reading group, but I know your friends are in this group, but this is the group that you could go in. I picked my friend group because, like, what does a first grader know? And what she chose to do was work with me in addition to that reading group because she that I had the ability to do more.
Yeah.
So I watch that with my daughter now. My daughter is a straight A student, but she's not a genius. And so a lot of times she just gets ignored. And I just think that happens.
Did you have hobbies, interests outside of your academics? Did you play sports or kind of what kept you busy at that point in your life?
So because I'm at the age I am at, when I was young, sports were not really things that girls did that much. It wasn't until probably preteens, early adolescence that started to happen for girls around me. I did track in high school, so it's something that I chose to do. I do still love running. I've run 2 marathons. I was a distance runner. I am not fast. I want to make sure I have enough energy to finish whatever race it is that I'm in. So that was the sport that I did. I had really, really strong friends.
Yeah.
And my high school friends are still my closest friends, people that I spend girls' weekends with. And my daughter's going into high school at soccer tryouts right now for high school. And what I'm telling her is that things change at that age. You get new friends, and the friends that I made in ninth grade are still my friends today.
No, I think that's another outlier factor. I think most people, as you go through different seasons in life, you have friend groups that change. What did you learn from that early friend group in terms of people and relationships that's carried with you to today?
There's two things. One is we were just who we were. And I didn't have friends that pressured me. My friends just allowed me to be me. So that creates like a psychological safety that you don't normally get at that
Yeah.
age. So I think that's part of it. We also had a very good friend of ours who died in a car accident when we were sophomores or juniors in high school. I can't remember which year it was at this point, but that's a pretty galvanizing event. And you sort of go through a lot there. And so I think that connected us in a way.
That's fascinating that you mentioned that you could be yourself around your friends. It's authenticity way before authenticity. That's one of the things I admire about you is that you bring that to your day in and day out work in terms of just being yourself, being comfortable in your own skin. How do you ingrain that into the culture? What have you done at Fortitude to try to make people feel like they can bring their true selves to work? They can have psychological safety with their management. What's been the approach you've taken for that?
I think it's in just what you said. I am who I am. I say what's on my mind. I'm obviously very respectful of people. My sort of purpose in life is love and compassion for people. So when I say that I am who I am and I say what's on my mind, I don't do that in a hurtful way.
Yeah.
To be clear. And I think, interestingly enough, it's such a different example of a leader than people are used to that it's pretty impactful. People really notice it right away. I share my vulnerabilities. I share mistakes. I didn't make the right call here. This was a mistake, and here's why. People are now at Fortitude Re used to that.
Yeah.
But when they first hear that from a leader, it's pretty shocking.
Take a step back. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in terms of setting the roadmap for a culture and for a leadership style, the first thing that you have to do is model what you expect
That's right.
to see in others. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's really important. Going back to childhood, if I was to ask you, what did you want to be when you grow up at that point? What was your answer?
All sorts of things. I wanted to be a teacher. Having watched my daughter's teachers through like kindergarten, elementary, I can't imagine choosing that as a career. The patience required is definitely beyond me. I wanted to be a marine biologist at one point. That was probably around eighth grade. I always wanted to be in service to other people. When I was in college, I was doing a psychology degree. I thought I was going to work with people in some way. When I graduated college, I didn't go into corporate America. I really didn't think this was big for me. I just thought that's all fake. I want to work with real people and I want to make an impact in people's lives. That is what I did. So that's really, for me, a common theme. I thought I would be not really a nurse or a doctor in terms of caring for people, but maybe working with people who had physical or mental disabilities and doing something like that.
Does that come from your father? I look at my own life. I was an athlete first before anything else. And I realized very quickly in college that I wasn't going to be like Mike and go to the NBA. I had to have a plan B. And I took a psychology course freshman year. The instructor was an industrial organizational psychologist, and I had never heard what that was. But it really showed me that the things that transferred over from sport, leadership, teamwork, motivation, and goal setting, could be applicable to leaders and senior executives in organizations. So that was the early fertile ground for me. Where did that come for you in terms of wanting to help people, be in service of others?
Well, look at my parents, right? My mom was a nurse and then she was a social worker. My father was a MD his whole life. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through 12th grade. So there was a lot embedded in me in my academic life about service. It's what drives me. It's what motivates me. What excites me is when I can help somebody else.
I've seen that firsthand in terms of the culture you've helped to shape at Fortitude. What was the most challenging year one for you in trying to bring that service mindset, cross-functional collaboration, enterprise leadership to the fray?
One of the first things I did, which is still, by the way, interestingly enough, controversial, is I renamed the entire function from HR people and culture. It is interesting how much some people really don't like that still.
Why do you think that's the case? When I see CHROs versus chief people officers, my mental paradigm goes right away to someone who is more focused on culture, organizational effectiveness, and leadership
Right.
versus someone who's more administrative, comp and benefits, talent acquisition. So why did you decide to do that?
That is exactly why. First of all, the term human resources was coined by an economist in the 1800s. It is very much about people as a commodity, people as a resource like a pencil or a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I think in today's business world, particularly in a professional services type organization, it is definitely not that. The other part of it is I think in order to be a successful professional services organization, you really have to put the people at the center of everything you're doing. And the human resources and personnel departments of the past are about rules and hierarchy.
Yep.
And this is a very different approach. So that's why I renamed it. And for me, it was put a stake in the ground to say, this is going to be different. How we're going to do this is different. It's not about rules for rules' sake. It's about how do we unlock your highest potential.
Yep.
I've given my function a purpose. I've expressed that to them. So that's why I retitled it. And that's still a journey.
I've seen that firsthand in terms of the leaders I've worked with across your organization. And so I think it's been hard work you've done the last 3 years to get it to this point. There's always more work to do, but I've been really impressed with how you've been able to really reshape the culture and get it to be more about employee engagement, the work-life balance. I think that's something that's really important for you and Alon in terms of giving people that ability to bring their best selves to work.
Yeah, that is. And look, I got lucky because when I came in, our CEO, Alon, was coming in at the same time. And the luck is that I am working with a CEO who has the same view as I do in terms of putting people at the center and leading with empathy. And that makes this a lot easier.
Absolutely. Going back to high school years, as I mentioned at the start, you went to Hofstra. What was the decision to go there? And what were some of the things you learned from your college experience?
So I'm a risk taker. I was not going to go to college. So this is kind of funny. Remember I said like my parents were a little bit more laissez-faire. So I said to them, I don't think I want to go to college. I want to take like a year off. I want to go live like in France. I'll like wait tables, which would be the worst idea. And they said, okay, if that's what you want to do. And then I was like, maybe that's not the best choice for me. So a pretty good strategy on their part. So freshman year of college, I actually went to a SUNY school. I went to SUNY Oneonta, and I just sort of ended up there because I didn't spend much time actually pursuing and looking at colleges and where I wanted to go because I wasn't going to do it. That was at the time where I really thought education and maybe early childhood or elementary education would be the career for me. And that school had a very good program for that. I got there and I couldn't have hated it more. It was really not the right match for me. I just was miserable there. So pretty early on in my freshman year, I started applying for transfer. And Hofstra was one of the schools I centered on. I had very loose affiliation with Hofstra. I had an uncle that went there. I just felt comfortable there.
Yeah.
So that's where I ended up.
When you look at that point in your life, were there any lessons you learned once you went to Hofstra that have stuck with you to today?
I think things that I learned in college for the first time had to do with figuring out how to bridge gaps with people who are different than me. And I learned that there more than anywhere before and learned that, wow, my life has been pretty sheltered to now. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that until I got to college. It's just a bigger community. There's more diversity. You're learning things that you just were not learning in a Catholic school upbringing. And that was very eye-opening for me. I know this is crazy, but I learned to study more, learned to be a lot more interested in my academics than I had been up till then.
Did you work as well at the same time, or you just focus on school?
I worked while I was there. Worked in one of the departments as an admin. I worked at a jewelry kiosk at the mall, did little odd jobs. I had to work for my spending money. So I did that while taking classes or over the summers. I worked in my dad's office as a receptionist. I did all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, sounds like you had a lot. I look at my college years. I spent most of my work time outside of school selling TVs at Sears. And I look at that experience. I learned more from that job about human nature and people, business development, sales than I have at any other point in my career, especially the way people can turn on others. There were people who would steal sales from each other as soon as you walked out of the department. So I'm always fascinated by lessons that come from the early work experiences that have stuck with you. Was there anything about people you picked up, about working habits, those type of things that came from that age?
Working in my dad's office was very interesting. My dad worked really hard, and he was one of those doctors who would stack up his appointments. So he had multiple patients in rooms at once. He would bring me into some of those patient rooms, and he would say, "This is my daughter. She's working for me for the summer. Do you mind if she comes into the exam room?" And
Wow.
they never minded, really. And watching him do it so quickly, but with such care was
Mm.
so fascinating. And watching my father just really caring for another human, not for a body.
Yeah. Another outlier in terms of physician's bedside manner. I can see how that's shown up in terms of your empathy today as a leader, how you work with others, influence that authority. And so it was probably fascinating to see him interact with people.
My father is a one of a kind personality, meaning like he's a big personality. Like he's not someone that's in a room and you don't notice. And so watching him be so caring was really eye opening for me. Not that he didn't care for me as a child, but I've never really seen him in that context with other people.
So finishing up college, what was your first job out of school?
When I left college, again, the corporate world was not for me, so I thought. And so I became a direct care aide at a residential home. They had taken in their first ever autistic adult male. He was at that time probably 23. My job was to be his direct care aide. And it is still today the hardest job I ever had.
Wow.
There's no way you could surpass that job, partly because the facility that I worked for had people with Down syndrome and other sort of things, but they didn't know how to deal with someone who had severe autism. And they threw this 21-year-old in on it. And I didn't know what I was doing either. I did a lot of overnights. It was pretty tough. I will spare you the very graphic stories.
He was nonverbal, I'm guessing?
He verbalized things, but he would repeat the word Coke
Yeah.
over and over and over again,
Yeah.
but non-communicative, I
Yeah.
guess, the right way to say it. So I had an epiphany one night where I had to get him into the shower, and I was standing there with this 6-foot naked man who was showering in front of me because I needed to help him.
Oh,
And I had this vision of myself, like, look at what you're doing. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You
yeah.
have this naked man who has feces all over him and all over the walls. And I just actually started laughing because I was like, this is the most preposterous. Like, what am I doing? So I'd laughed. He stopped everything that he was doing and he looked at me and he started laughing. And that made me laugh more. It kind of broke the tension of the moment or whatever. So I went home from that shift and I was like, okay, well, that's it. I'm done with that. No longer doing that job. And that was what that epiphany moment was. Like, no, this is not for you.
Where'd you go from there?
I moved to New York, made contact with some college friends, and got a job at Paine Webber. So that's where I started my foray into the investment banking world. And so it's where I discovered that what I thought was not a fit for corporate America, which is my candor and my authenticity, is actually a pretty good match. And I moved from banking into the dot-com world and then into insurance. It wasn't until I got into the insurance industry that I started working with people who are passive aggressive. But up until that point, I was just used to working with people who are aggressive. It was just so sort of shocking. It's like, I think the words that you're saying sound like they should be nice. So connecting that was new for me.
I look at my early career, it was very similar. I started with private equity, doing due diligence assessments of C-suite leaders, CEOs, and many of the private equity partners that I worked with were aggressive, assertive. You had 5 minutes to tell them what they needed to hear about a CEO or a C-suite team, and that was it. And so having that as my early foray into leadership, it was a strong lesson in terms of be punctual, be succinct, be articulate, get it out quick. And then as you start to see other personality types, passive aggressive, narcissists, a lot of the other things that come along that you see at some point in your career, having that as a baseline, I think gives you that kind of grit and fortitude to deal with different personality types.
Yeah, absolutely. It does for sure. And by the way, I think the passive aggressive environments are because direct conflict is not encouraged.
Yep.
Direct disagreement is not encouraged. So it just festers in a different way. But having comfort with disagreement, because through the disagreement, you come to the right decision, helps you identify where that's happening in those more passive aggressive environments.
It's fascinating that you said that, Denise. Do you think that those situations that occur, passive aggressive cultures versus more direct cultures, is that shadow of the CEO? Is it just personality types in the C suite? What are some of the causes that put you down one path? I know you've done a lot of work at Fortitude around radical candor and trying to get people to be more honest and open with each other. But I see it a lot across industries. You'll have one or two bad apples in a C suite, and those passive aggressive behaviors can start to permeate through the organization. So I'm curious where that is for you.
If I look at Marsh McLennan, which by the way, I'm really proud to be from there. I'm really proud of my very long tenured career there, but it's a very large company. It's not easy to change a dynamic like that on a dime. It's like turning an aircraft carrier, and one CEO is actually not going to be able to change that cultural dynamic. That organization really prized collegiality. They would call it collaboration, but it was really collegiality. And so when you think about that, if that's what's prized and rewarded, don't disagree. Just be collegial with me.
Consensus thinking, group think.
Yeah. It's hard because with executive teams, certainly the CEO sets a tone for the organization. But in an organization as big as that, really, I think where the rubber meets the road is middle management.
Makes perfect sense. Going back to mentors, when did you have your first mentor in your career? First person that maybe saw potential in you didn't know, or helped to bring out some of your other skills?
Also, at Payne Weber, she's now a personal long term friend, obviously, because this was so long ago. But she was just someone that worked there. She came up to me in the hallway and said, I think you'd be really good at recruiting. I have a job. Do you want to come try it? And so she was my boss for several years and taught me everything I knew. If she was listening to this podcast, she'd be so embarrassed. She was really one of the first mentors. She's someone that saw some potential in me and this would be something you're good at and taught me how to do it. The funny part about that, if I could just extend it into another story, it is one of the biggest professional leadership lessons I learned because she and I worked together for several years and I was like, a punky 20 something. And so I got to the point where I was like, I could do her job. I was getting frustrated because I wanted to do more. And what does Joy do that I couldn't do? Well, guess what? Joy came in one day and said, I have to tell you I'm leaving and I recommended that you take my job. And boy, what a shocker. When she left, I had the sobering realization that I had no idea what she was doing. All the things that she had shielded me from, and I was just thrown into the deep end. And so it was a very, very humbling experience that I'm very lucky to have had in my 20s. And I tell that story to a lot of people because what you hear a lot, things like, me and my team work harder than that team, or I do more for this company than anyone else. And I always say to people, don't assume you know what other people are doing. You only know what you're doing.
What were some early mistakes you made in that first role?
The mistakes that I made in that role were all about how to manage up. Everything that she protected me from, I didn't know how much she was doing there.
Managing up or organizational politics too?
Both, yeah, all of that. So reporting up, making sure that they felt comfortable, informed, knew what was happening. I was just a doer at that point. I didn't realize there was that whole other part. So it was a big realization for me that there's a whole other part of being a team lead or a functional lead is nothing about the tactics of what you're doing, nothing about the team that you're leading. It's all about what's happening upward.
I've been doing this work now for 20 plus years, and I think there are several themes as you go VP to SVP or director to VP. We've experienced it in the work we've done together at Fortitude with strong, talented individual contributors being put into leadership or management roles and either thinking it's not part of their job or they can't get out of the tactical. Why do you think it's challenging for so many people, regardless of industry, regardless of role, to make that leap and do less, get more done with and through others?
So I think I've told you this before. By the way, I think there's a book in here for us. If we could write it together, we should do that.
Yeah.
Because this is the topic I have found I coach people the most on, is this leadership transition topic. So I think everyone struggles with it somehow. Part of it is your identity to date has been that technical. So it feels very, very scary to no longer be submitting that as your work because what am I credible for? What is the value that I'm driving? And it feels like exposing, oh, maybe I'm not doing worthwhile work.
I've heard guilt too because you're not involved in the details of the day to day.
Yeah. The other side of that is the people who should be doing the work that are on your team are feeling either that you don't trust them, that you're controlling, and you're certainly not developing them in any way. I think it's just uncomfortable. Get over yourself. I think that's the other part because people aren't going to do it exactly how you would. And that has to be okay. So sometimes it's hard because I'm the expert in that. And you're not doing it the way I would do it. And you have to step back and go, okay, it's going to be the way that they do it. And that's pretty hard to let go.
Yeah, that's a big piece. Your time at Marsh McLennan, you also did a couple roles outside of HR, correct?
Yes, I did.
What did that teach you about the phrase being a strategic HR business partner?
It was very fascinating. It was like having a mirror put in front of you in some ways. I became the business leader that the HR partner was dealing with. So these were friends and colleagues that I had, and all of a sudden they were sitting with me and they were saying, you need to have your performance ratings distribution look like this. And here's why I need it that way. And I would say, but it's so fascinating is you told me nothing about how it would make my business better or why it's important for business performance. So everything you're saying is just because you need to check a box on your list. And I had never really heard it that way or see it that way. That for me was a really eye-opening experience and has shaped the way I think this function ought to run, which is like not process and policies for the sake of them, right? Which is what's going to drive performance for the organization. Let's do that.
If you were to give advice to senior leaders in HR who are trying to shift the culture from back office, handling most administrative, to being those strategic partners in the room with the business leaders, what two or three things would you tell them to do early on?
I think having a growth mindset and being humble. What I mean by that is you've got to deeply understand the business before you try to contribute to strategic direction. So doing that by saying like, I don't understand that. Every business has all of their acronyms that they speak. Just stop and say, what does that mean? I don't know what those combination of four letters means. People are usually very happy to tell you about their subject matter expertise. They'll talk about it forever. So use that and learn about it. So that's one. And then once you do that, be brave.
Yeah.
And I've never really felt like I sit in a box and I can only talk about the following things. Just last couple weeks, I was stepping into an issue for our COO because he was out on a cruise with family. And there was an issue that really needed to continue to run with pace, nothing to do really with people or HR. It had to do with claims management. And so I scheduled some meetings and stepped in and asked about the actuarial reserves and did this and did that. A couple of the people that I scheduled meetings with were like, why is the chief people officer asking me? I have enough knowledge to be able to keep the ball moving. That when the COO came back, he wasn't picking it up and it's now 2 weeks delayed. So having that ability to do that, I think is important. And being able to voice opinions about things is important. I think being driven, I just gave this advice to someone recently for people who are starting careers. If you don't know how to use predictive analytics, if you don't know how to look at data and try to figure out what it's telling you, it's pretty hard to make an argument for why to go this direction or that direction.
Was there a moment when you think about that point in your career, Denise, where you knew you were going to get into the C-suite? Did you have ambitions to go there?
I did not. When I was at Marsh McLennan, I had done so many things there. I'd done so many different jobs. That's why it was such a wonderful experience for me. But I was getting to the point where I was like, I don't know what is left for me. At that point, I wasn't aspiring to be the CHRO of Marsh McLennan. I didn't really think that was attainable, I guess. I don't know. It didn't really dawn on me. But it was at that point where my peers were saying, I would work for you. I think you should try to go for a job like that. And I would work for you.
Why do you think they said that at that point, looking back at it?
Why they said that is they saw me as a leader. They saw me as someone that set goals and got people running in the same path towards those goals. They saw me as decisive, fair, authentic, knowledgeable about the business, knowledgeable about sort of the tactics of HR, personable, fun. I just hadn't really considered it until people who I greatly respected and felt like had really deep experience were telling me, you should do that job. I would work for you in that job. And I was like, okay, maybe I should think about that.
So your leadership style sounds like it was something that evolved naturally. It wasn't like you wanted to focus on certain things as a mid-level manager to more of a senior level manager. These things based on your upbringing, background, were things that came naturally.
Yeah, and I never had ambition for a seat in and of itself. That was never my goal. Like, I want this title. That's super important to me. My career ambition was always to continue to be doing things that were challenging and enabling me to solve complicated problems, to do something that's different. And so I always just pursued that. So how I ended up with all these different jobs, if you take Marsh McLennan as an example, is because I would say, I want to try that, or I think I can fix that problem. And so that's gotten me into really hard jobs before. And as a result, I stacked up experiences that really helped me to do the job that I have today, because it's diversity of experiences. I've been in and out of HR. I've run large, complex operations that were multinational. And so by continuing to pursue something different, something challenging, I really amassed these experiences that help me do what I do now.
Looking beyond that, how important did relationships play? I look at my own career. One of the first lessons I learned right out of graduate school, I had a senior partner at the firm I work with, RHR International. They said, you do good work, you get more work. And it was very, very basic and simple. And that's something that I've kept my whole career. Even our relationship, we started working together at Voya. I had a one-off coaching engagement with the chief administrative officer that ended up leaving the company. And those relationships led to other programs and other things. And so I'm a real big believer that the quality of your work will speak for itself.
Yeah.
But you do have to invest in relationships. You have to make it genuine and authentic. So what role does that play for you as you start to branch out and take on more influence?
Yeah, it's pretty huge. So, including this job, although a search firm did place me, the person that placed me in the search firm is someone who I had a very long-term relationship with. We met very early on at Marsh McLennan. So I've known him for what, I don't know, over 20 something years. So even that job was relationship based. Every job I've ever gotten from the very first job out of college was relationship based. And so that's pretty huge if you think about that. The jobs and opportunities that was given at Marsh McLennan across those 14 years were based on relationships, people that saw the work that I did, trusted my capability. It's funny when you say, if you do good work, you get more work. And I have had points in my career where I thought, like, why can't I be like that guy? Like one program a year, it's like nothing, so easy. And my friend Jen said to me, Denise, you would need a lobotomy. And she was so right. You're just not wired for that. You're wired for the challenges and doing more. But when you're that type of person, it is like, why can't I just have the easy job once in a while?
Does that concern you for your daughter when you think about her entering the workforce next 6, 7 years and how for her generation, it's social media, it's technology. There's not that focus on relationships and face to face, the human interactions. I think COVID started to create that schism where people found it easier to do virtual, to not be in person. And I've seen in my work that the times where I'm in the room with executives, it's just much more impactful. There's more meaning. So does that concern you for younger generations as they start to enter the workforce?
It does, although I think sports really helps my daughter balance that out. You're not playing soccer with a computer.
That's right. That's right.
And it requires a lot of communication, relationship building, trust building. And so I think that really helps. It's why a lot of schools are creating these no cell phone policies. Like her high school, she has to put her phone in a pouch that's locked all day so they can't use the phone. We've had very strict policies around what she's allowed to have on her phone. She doesn't have Instagram or that kind of stuff. I think what concerns me more is just the focus on achievement and that stress and anxiety that creates in this generation. I think that concerns me more, and particularly with girls. And I've had my daughter say things to me like that I have it so together and I'm so secure in who I am. And when she said that to me, I was like, well, whoa, well, like, I wasn't always like this now because I'm grown up and I've learned some of these things, but here are the things that I'm insecure about. And I think that that's part of what this social media driven culture does. Need this very curated impression of everybody else, and they all seem so perfected.
I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about your current role and some of the experiences you've had the last several years. Talk to me about something you're most proud of, your time at Fortitude, a success, an achievement that really has stood out for you.
I'm really proud of being a great place to work 2 years in a row. I'm very proud of that because I think it is a testament to all of the things that we've tried to do here to make this a great place to work. I'm very proud of the team that I've built. And that team is a team that is a combination of inherited, the team that existed when I was here, and brought on from other places. And so, as my team would tell you, I'm a crier. It's very embarrassing to cry at work. Do it all the time. But where I get all choked up is watching that blended team and how they really are exemplary. If I could somehow bottle that and show that to other people, this is how a team works together, supports each other, understands each other's swim lanes, and they stay very focused on that purpose. I'm immensely proud of that. I think I have the best team out there, and they're just so good at what they do, and they're so good at working with each other.
So I have so many follow-ups. I want to start first with the getting it to be a great place to work. What were some of the early challenges that you had to overcome to make the company become what it is today?
So there were a lot of things, legacy in the culture, that we really had to try to ferret out. There were some fantastic things of the culture that we also had to maintain and protect. That was a balance. There had been an approach to how people were paid that was very top down driven, so much so that like really a single person could decide, I'm going to pay Adam this because I like Adam. I'm going to pay Denise this because I don't like Denise. So we had to change that and make it much more based on performance and market data for the job and all of that. It might not sound like it, but that has a huge cultural impact in terms of fairness. That manifested in sort of that compensation example I gave you. Either you had the light shone upon you from the prior CEO or you didn't. And that had a lot of damaging impact from people who are hugely valuable for the organization, but weren't in the light. So we had to really make sure that this sort of flat hierarchical approach was felt by everybody. One of the things that I was told when I came in is you really got to fix. We have this unlimited PTO and everyone hates it because they think it's just a way to get away with not paying people for time. So you got to fix it. It's a big disaster. And so I dug into how I really do everything is through listening to the people. So it's like, okay, thank you very much. That's what you guys told me. Now I'm going to go listen to all the people. What I found is people loved the concept. What they didn't love is the execution. So the example wasn't being set. People were not afforded the opportunity to take time off. There was really, really horrible balance. And I'm not like a big believer in work-life balance. I think it's like work-life integration.
Yeah.
But people were being run into the ground. So the turnover rate was huge, 14% voluntary turnover rate. So what I discovered was actually all of the executives, all the leaders are setting the wrong example because none of you are taking time off. And so we changed some things. We started to encourage people to take time off. We created a week closure, which we call Fortitude Re Unplugged. We created competition, submitted pictures of what you did with your week off, and people win a prize for whoever used their week the best. And our utilization of PTO has risen now to really what's a pretty normal rate. People use 15 days of PTO plus the additional 5 for the unplugged week. So it's like 20 days of PTO, which is pretty healthy. That's our average. But it requires work, making sure we're messaging it the right way. That's all part of the reset of the culture. So we're not rewarding you for working hard, we're rewarding you for working smart and working well.
That makes sense. Going to your team, I think many leaders, especially C-suite leaders, come into the situation where they're inheriting part of their team and then they have to go out and bring some folks in. I've rarely seen in my career a leader who was in a role or a predecessor who someone else came in and the person ended up staying with the organization, and you experienced that as well. So how did you navigate that first off? And then how did you build a team with the inherited and the folks that you brought in from the outside?
Yeah. I didn't think that was going to work. Let me just be very honest about it. When they told me that they really would like to keep the incumbent at the firm because they loved her, they thought that she could still drive value. I said, okay, I'll give it a try, but I've never seen something like that work. How I managed that would be a great question for her. She's written some things about it, which were fascinating to read about the realization that career growth can come from stepping to the side versus always looking up. It was a very tough pill for her to swallow. So part of the success, I think the majority of the success has to go credit to her in terms of how she chose to show up. We've managed it with very, very honest conversation. So she's capable of saying to me, I don't feel so great in this moment. Everyone's looking at me like, everything's so great now. And when I ran it, it was a disaster. And I'm feeling like humiliated by that. So having that direct conversation is, I think, the only way to manage through it. And having her feel safe enough to say that, I think, has enabled her just to work through that. By the way, what I say to her is, you are a critical part of what is successful. You're a huge pillar in what makes it successful. And so it's not in spite of you, it's because of you. She needs that. I mean, that's human, right? So that was with the prior CHRO. And I think the way we look at it is we were destined to work together, lifelong relationship, whatever shape that takes. And my promise to her was always like, look, if this ever doesn't work for you, if you decide, okay, been there, done that, learned that, I want to go be a CHRO somewhere, that's totally cool. You can just say that, and I will try to help you do that.
In working with her last year when we were coaching together, I think that was one of the biggest reasons that she shared with me why she stayed was because of the relationship she had with you, because of the psychological safety you created with her. There was the impressions that colleagues had about her. You helped her to turn that around. You gave her a sounding board where there were tough days. And so I know that's something that really meant a lot to her.
Yeah. And like I said, we're lucky that she is because she's doing great things for the firm. And then I came in with a different notion of what I wanted the function to be, what I thought it needed to be for the success of the organization. And so when you do that, you have people who exist in the prior function who are going to select out because they're just not aligned to that. And that's okay.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about setbacks. But what was a major setback for you, Denise, when you look at any point in your career? Could be something that was unexpected or something's really a tough season for you to get through.
So I took a role that was the promise of something. You know what all this is. So I had left Marsh McLennan and I was doing coaching, and the then CHRO of Marsh McLennan called me and said, I just had breakfast with somebody. He's looking for his number two, someone would to be his successor. Really, I told him all about you. I think you should go talk to him. And so I did. I interviewed with him and a couple of members of his team. And through the recruitment process, it was very clear that he was retiring. He didn't have a set timeline, but the conversation was, I'm going to retire in 12 to 18 months. Over that period, I'm going to work with you so that you will step into this seat. I started that job thinking that what I was told in the interview was truthful, and that other people in the interview process or that the team that I was joining would also know, one, that I was hired. They did not. So I'm sitting there day one. Let me think about the day one experience. Day one, the head of talent acquisition knew I was coming, but pretty much everyone else on my peer group team was like, who is that person sitting in the room?
You hadn't met with any of them during the interview process?
I met with two people who were leaving within the year. That was pretty shocking. Like, wait, what's going on here? So it was like my first signal that there is something not right.
Yeah.
So just to fast forward, the big disappointment was how I was recruited and what I was told in the recruitment process was not truthful. I was not being hired to be that person's successor. And that was pretty eye-opening. Like I felt very
A betrayal almost in a sense, right?
yeah. And so my personality, I just decided, well, I got to talk about it. Hey, this feels different. This is what we talked about when you hired me, and that feels like something has changed. And I got very like cagey, non-direct responses to that. And I just decided, okay, I got to make the best of it. I'm here now. Let me try to do the best I can on behalf of the organization. But that was a pretty big setback for me.
Another big lesson I've learned along the way is people don't quit jobs, they quit their bosses. And
Yeah.
it's a really big thing that if that relationship goes sour and the trust is broken, I think that's something it takes years to build it, and one situation can damage or destroy it. So it's something that's really, really important. Have you seen other situations, maybe not you directly, that betrayal or breaking trust has really damaged relationships in any of the organizations you've worked for?
Yeah, I have to say for me, a really big downside of my personality is once that is broken, once that lack of integrity is displayed, like I just can't get back. I can try, but I'd be lying if I said I could get that to normal. I just don't recover from that.
How do you know, or how do you trust your spidey sense where it is a lack of integrity versus a lack of awareness or a lack of understanding? They're two strong, different things in terms of the integrity piece versus someone who lacks self awareness or social awareness. So, given your experiences, when do you trust your spidey sense? When do you know this is going down that road versus the other?
I think when the chips just stack up to a degree that you can't deny, when you catch people in bold face lies, the first time that happens, you can be like, oh, okay, maybe it was a mistake or maybe there was a misunderstanding. But when it continues to happen, then you know you've got an integrity issue. I had this interesting debate with someone recently because they said, is it integrity or is it sincerity? And I said, well, is there really a difference? I think sincerity is what leads to integrity. So, yes, I have seen this breakdown of trust. Employing a little radical candor really can help with that.
If you're giving advice to first time C suite leaders, if they've damaged trust, maybe two or three things that they could do to repair it, anything you picked up along your journey that would be good advice to others?
Yeah, certainly think humbling yourself is important.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, I think the first thing you could possibly do is say, I messed up. And just owning that, I think that goes a long way. Not being able to say that, it's like when they patch a road versus fixing a road, there's always still that bump there. So I think that's probably first and foremost and probably the hardest thing for people to do.
In 2025, do you think that's still a gender thing, or do you think it's a personality style, the ego and not being able to admit mistakes, be humble?
I wish that it wasn't a gender thing. It probably is still. All the studies would show you a woman candidate won't go for a job unless she's basically done the job. Whereas a male candidate would be like, oh, good enough. I'm going to try. Women are a lot more like, well, gee, because I haven't done this, this, and this, maybe they won't want me for that. We're much more readily talking about, well, I didn't do this well or did that well. I've seen women who aren't able to humble themselves. I've seen it over and over again. So I don't think that dynamic is gender based, but admitting to mistakes, I think women more easily do that.
Another big thing about being in the C suite or just moving up in an organization, it gets more lonely the higher you move up. Have there been any lonely moments for you in any of your roles last decade or so where you didn't have a mentor, you didn't have a coach, you didn't have someone to bounce ideas off of? And how did you navigate that season?
I think the chief people officer is one of the loneliest roles. I think only bested in loneliness by the CEO, probably because you can't really commiserate. There's just a lot that you can't talk about with peers. And the person that you're advising and supporting is also your boss. So that's a little weird. This is probably the loneliest role.
That makes really good sense. I like to call the CHRO or the chief people officer that's an advisor, internal coach to the CEO, the consigliere from The Godfather, if you remember. What's made you successful in doing that? I see the relationship you have with the law. I would consider you his internal coach in terms of navigating things, bouncing ideas off. Was that a natural thing given both your personalities? Did that take time? How did you get to a position where influence with that authority was so strong?
So it is sort of naturally how I've always approached my HR business partner role. Even if I go years and years back as a senior HR business partner, that's what I would be doing with a particular business leader. What I try to balance is channeling truth to power, but in a way that doesn't usurp that power. That's a sometimes delicate balance. Particularly, we don't have a CEO who has like an outsized ego, but you work with people in senior leadership roles anywhere who have pretty outsized egos. And so you don't really get very far if jeopardizing that veneer for them. So I think what's enabled me to be an advisor, you call it consigliere. Someone told me I'm like the lady in billions.
Wendy. That's how I usually tell people when they say, "What do you do for a living?" I'll say, Wendy with external consulting.
Right, right. But I think it's that I can do that, but also enable them to still be the leader. Hey, this is your choice. I just want to give you this perspective and this perspective. You choose it. I will help you make it successful, even if it's not what I would have done, but I'm not that person in that job. And then as hard as it is for any human being, I never say I told you so.
That's a big deal.
It's hard. I might think it.
Yeah, that's really important. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about just leadership more broadly. Given your role as a chief people officer, given your career history, what does great leadership look like to you today?
That's so interesting because I do think it's evolved over the last few years. I've talked about empathy before, and I do think that is a really huge component of leadership. I think leaders today, they have to be authentic and it has to be contextualized, right? It depends on what kind of company you're working in, what's happening in the environment. But ultimately, a leader is someone that's helping other people unlock potential.
That's right.
And so how do you do that if you're not it's like the Ted Lasso quote, don't just judge, seek to understand. So I think continuing to learn, trying to understand what's happening with an individual or within a problem, that's a huge component of leadership. I think trying to leave things behind. So if you're in an executive leadership position, you should be thinking about your legacy because you're at the pinnacle of your career because I'm not going to be here forever. So I want to leave it a net better off. I think leaders have to be inspiring. That's a tough one because you have to be authentic. Not all of us are these like gregarious, charismatic people. I'm actually an introvert. And I think people think, well, that's weird because you should be a people person. I deeply care for and love people, but I energize myself by going on a walk by myself. That doesn't mean I can't inspire other people. Doesn't mean I can't set a vision, morale people around achieving that vision. And that gets back to the whole concept of tactician to leadership. That is a job in and of itself. You and I work with someone now who's on our leadership team who had this analogy that I just keep using because it's so great about what this transition is like for him, which is I can do that. But I love being in my own house, very comfortable in my house. But it doesn't mean I never leave my house. I can leave my house. I'm just not as comfortable as when I'm in my house. And that was such a great way to think about it in terms of you really have to press yourself to do that. So I think it's about a growth mindset, being empathetic, continuing to seek to understand people, what they need, and changing your leadership style to be what's best for that team or those individuals.
Of the things you shared, Denise, which of these things are difficult to learn, which come naturally to some?
What I see is difficult to learn is that some people have grown up professionally in the directive, authoritative leadership environment. And what I'm expressing here is quite different than that. And I think that is just a mindset shift. That's not what's expected of you. And you can unlock so much greater potential if you're thinking about are people healthy? Are they well mentally, physically, financially? And how do I create an environment where they feel like they belong and then therefore can achieve great things?
Do you think that's a trend that's changing? If you look at the macro level, geopolitically, authoritative leaders seem to be popping up everywhere. Is that casting a shadow on business?
Yeah, I do think if you think about the whole this mandate, I hate when they call it return to work because I'm actually in a home office, but I'm working.
Yeah.
So I'm not returning from anything. But if you think about that, it is my personal opinion that some of the investment banks are great examples. Some of them have just mandated everyone has to be in the office 5 days a week.
Yeah, Jamie Dimon right away 6 months ago. He wanted everyone back, and that set all his peers into the same tivy and follow suit.
Yeah. And so I think that authoritative, dictatorial leadership style that you see invading back. But what I know deeply about what motivates people is autonomy as one of them and being able to make the right decision. And I believe very strongly we employ really smart, well educated, experienced, fully formed adults who, if you let them, will make really good decisions on behalf of the company. And maybe go back to my Catholic school upbringing. One of the things I believe very deeply is if you put too much rules around me, I will wither. But if you allow me the space to innovate and master my craft and make decisions that are best for the company, think about how much more exciting that is.
Another big buzzword that I've seen a lot, probably the last decade or so of my coaching work, VP to SVP, SVP to EVP, is executive presence. And I think every person has their own definition or mental model of what it means. What does that mean to you? And what does that mean to you as a first time C suite leader?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was just thinking about this morning, actually, because someone was talking about someone on his team to me yesterday. And he said, I think his ability to lead at a higher level is limited because he's not in the office enough and he needs to be present. And I didn't really bite on that in the moment, but I was reflecting on it this morning and thinking, people mistake executive presence, like actual physical presence. And you can exude presence in a lot of other ways. It's not just physical. The other mistake on executive presence, like I talked about, you don't have to be life of the party, owning the room all the time. But I think having a quiet confidence could also be that executive presence. It's one that I've had people ask me about a lot and they struggle with because you wonder, is it something you have or don't have, or is it something you can learn?
I found in my work that it's comprised of a couple different buckets. There's actually a great Harvard Business Review article, probably from about 6 months ago, where they compared what different leaders view executive presence as in 2012 and
Mhm.
what they viewed it in 2022. And there were some big major differences. They looked at traits, they looked at behaviors, and then they looked at culture. Things like authenticity, much more important in 2022 versus being more assertive in 2012. Your social media presence in 2022 versus being well dressed or well polished. And so there were some changes there, but I found there's different components. So there definitely is, how do you carry yourself, both in terms of just physical appearance, command of a room, but that's only one facet. There is a big piece around assertiveness and understanding when to push, when to pull.
Mhm.
Some of the strongest leaders I've worked with say less than their people say. They're the last to speak in meetings, they're the last to speak in the room. They don't have to hear their own voice. So knowing when to use your voice, knowing when to use silence, that's really important as well. So I think these are factors. And I believe all these things are learned skills you can pick up on. It does take time. It does take practice. You have to refine this skill. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You're going to make some mistakes and say the wrong thing at the wrong point in time in a meeting. But I think it's things that most leaders can learn. When you think about your first experience in a C-suite role, what advice would you have for people who are stepping into these roles for the first time? They may have ran a business unit, they may have ran a function, and now they're sitting in that room, buck stops with them. What two or three things would you say they should really be thinking about first 6 to 9 months in the role?
Counter to the 90-day methodology, I think you've got to assess your team and the capabilities pretty quickly and try to get the right team around you as quick as you can.
I found that one of the early things that I try to do in coaching first time C suite leaders is getting them to think at an organizational, team, and individual level. So there should be a focus and emphasis that you place on your relationship with the CEO. There should be a focus and emphasis on the relationships you place with your peers and how do you start to influence them. And then to your point, it's the relationships in the team that you're building. Are
Yeah.
you inheriting people and do you have to bring some folks in? Do you have to bring a whole new team from the beginning? And so really trying to allocate your time in each of those buckets. And we found through our research that full executive integration in these types of roles takes a year. And there's different kind of cycles. Those first 90 days are the honeymoon phase. The next phase is the reality phase. That's usually the point, months 4 to 7, where someone will leave if they're going to. If they get through that, they go into the adjustment phase. They start to get their bearings. And then they fully integrate about 9 to 12 months in. And so that's a big cycle where you have to really be intentional around relationships, around role clarity and alignment, around navigating the culture, trying to get some early wins. And so it's really important to do that with all those stakeholder groups.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had here and really in a lot of executive teams, I don't think it's unique to this particular company, is this concept of what is team one? What is your first team? And wrapping your mind around actually the executive team is the most important team and working in that team environment is really job number one, because that is where you're making decisions on behalf of the enterprise with an enterprise mindset. If you're only focused downward or like just one step to the left, then you're not going to be making holistic decisions that are best for the overall company. I do think that that is a huge mindset shift, the executive level, because you just, until then, worked in very senior level roles within a function, let's say, or within a business, you haven't really been charged. Yes, you've been charged with collaborating. Decision making on behalf of the enterprise can only happen if you've really considering that executive team as your priority.
Are there other things that you have to take into consideration when you're trying to shift a culture from silo to more enterprise mindset? I know you've done a lot of work at Fortitude around this. Any other things you would say besides the one team philosophy?
Yeah, I think having that siloed mindset makes a lot of sense to me in terms of company growth. You kind of have to start that way because you got to set up your shop before you lift up your head and say, okay, now, like, what else? One of the problems that you find is you haven't been creating a pipeline of talent beneath you who can then lead that part. And so I think that's the bridge that we need to cross now is really the whole architecture of roles. Does the next level have people that they can rely on? And does the leverage model work?
If you could go back now to your early career and give your younger version of you some advice based on your roles and experiences last 20 years, what would be the one or two things you'd whisper into her ear?
I would say keep having fun, keep building the relationships that you're building because those are what have been so sustaining and important for my career, for how I was able to hire such a great team here. I would say don't be afraid to take risks. I did take risks in my career. I did lots of different things. I was never really sure how that was going to work out.
What gave you the courage to do that? I think many leaders struggle with going outside their sweet spots, not taking, I like to say calculated risks, not foolish risks, but to have a wiring in the DNA where you do it naturally and you're comfortable with the unknown, comfortable with walking out on the skinny end of the branch. Where did you pick that up?
I don't know, honestly. I'll just make it work. I'll just make it happen. And if it turns out to be a mistake, like I have made career mistakes, I'm just going to make the most lemonade I can make out of those lemons until I can figure out the next move.
You talked about legacy a little while ago. I wanted to close with that today before we get into some rapid fire questions. What does that word mean for you?
So, the whole reason I took this role is I was really excited about the opportunity because I was really being given a greenfield opportunity. When the chairman of our board met with me, he said, "Oh, I don't really know what you do, but you just tell me what you need and you just do it." And I'm like, okay, that's great. That sounds perfect for me. And so when I think about what I'd like to leave behind, I've always thought it was bizarre that businesses seem to make this trade. Either you're a company that just wins in the marketplace, treat your people like crap, and it's really like a sweatshop, a burn and churn talent model. And those two things seem to go together. If you think of some of the most successful companies, and we could pick lots of different industries, you dig underneath that, people hate it there. And then you've got really nice places to work, but they're middling performers. They're not terrible. Obviously, you wouldn't be in business. One is a weird trade. I actually think you can be both. You can be a great place to work. You can give people psychological safety. And actually, that's going to propel superior performance and you can win in the marketplace. So, from a business perspective, that's exciting to me. If we can create a company that marries those two and we can show people you don't have to be absolutely cruel to your people, get the best out of them. Actually, the other thing works better. That's the legacy I'd like to leave. And I know Alon shares that legacy. So, that's exciting to me that I have a partner that also is passionate about that.
So let's finish up. I'd love to do some rapid fire questions, kind of end on a fun note. What's one word your team would use to describe your leadership style?
Think probably inspiring.
Okay. Yes, I would agree with that. One misconception people have about you.
People think I'm intimidating.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
I think the intimidation comes from I project self-assuredness, and that can be intimidating.
I can say from an outside perspective, knowing you now in our relationship for the last 7, 8 years, I think it is the radical candor. I think you will tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Right.
And for some that can be off-putting, for some that can be intimidating. Some people don't want to hear that.
Yes.
You have no problem doing that. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, you're right.
One thing you really like to geek out on.
I am a really big geek. So there's a lot of options. I am absolutely addicted to New York Times puzzles. So it started with the crossword puzzle. I do it every day. I've been doing it every day since probably my early 20s. And it has expanded to all of the online puzzles like Wordle and Connections. If you look at my kitchen table, I have a wood walnut table. It looks like Diaries of a Madman because I do the puzzle while I'm drinking coffee, sitting at the table, and there's all these letters from the Newsprint all over the table, like a crazy person lives here.
That's funny. Outside of that, what's one thing you do every day that you try to never leave off the agenda?
Hug my daughter.
First thoughts to come to mind when you hear the word social media.
Awful. I only have one social media account. It's Instagram. It's like my guilty pleasure. And I tried to get rid of it because I was telling my daughter how I just think it's really not healthy. Like I said before, it creates false sense of reality and then therefore feelings for people of like, well, why isn't my life as great as what I'm seeing here? And I think that leads to a lot of mental health problems. And so I was going to get rid of Instagram because of that. And someone at work's my team, Carmen, who you know, was like, why? I'm like, because how can I tell my daughter not to have it when I'm sitting there going, oh, look at this funny. And she said, you're an adult and you need like a guilty pleasure downtime.
First things that comes to mind when you hear the word AI.
Opportunity.
That's how I would look at it too. So I had one of my first interns who's been working with me now for 6 years. And for a year, he would say to me, you have to try it, you have to try it. And I was like, no, I don't need it. I finally started using ChatGPT last November, and I probably use it for 80% of my work just as a thought partner, just to bounce ideas off. So I think opportunity is a great way to surmise it.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. It's just a matter of how to use it well.
Yep. I think it's a really big piece. Last question. What do you hope listeners walk away from this conversation?
I think it's interesting to hear about other people's career journeys, how they maybe pursued intentionally or unintentionally where they are, that taking risks is okay. And in fact, can help you unlock ways you never knew existed.
Well, this has been great, Denise. I really appreciate your time. I think the insights you've shared will really help people. I'm thinking about an audience now, a group of leaders that I'm working with that are at the SVP level across a number of different industries. They will be in the C-suite next 5 to 10 years. And your experiences, not just being a HR practitioner, but having the business experience, the work that you've done outside of HR is really going to be insightful. Thank you for that. And thank you again.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this show. One of the ways you can support this channel is to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This tremendously helps with the YouTube algorithms to get the Tales from the C-Suite podcast, broader exposure to leaders from all walks of life. I would greatly appreciate your help in supporting the growth of our channel. If you find our interviews insightful and helpful with your career, please encourage your friends and colleagues to also listen to our episodes and subscribe, like, and comment on the videos. Thank you for your support.